My question will go to Mr. Pile. I want to thank him, first of all, for the beautiful map he presented on hazards and vulnerability in South Africa. I have two questions, actually. The first one is that he acknowledged that data is not forthcoming, especially from the local municipality, to build into the big data. We know when you the data set will function depending on what he gets from the local municipalities. So my question is, if the municipalities are struggling to conduct things like risk assessment, how can we get a national comprehensive data of risk and vulnerability? And then the second one is that, I don't know, maybe if you can give us a clear indication if actually we've done the vulnerability assessment for the whole country. And if there are models and indicators that were used to construct that vulnerability, if you can share that with us, that would be very, very good. And my last part is that for all the hazard that he mentioned, did he take into cognizance the interconnectedness and the cascading effects of most of the hazards? For example, the drought will normally affect water, water will affect electricity, all that will culminate into maybe macroeconomic issues. Is that taken care of as well?
Okay.
Thank you.
Declan Pillay. He's not on the Zoom. Okay, so we will we'll keep that question in mind.
There is in the Q&A, there's a Gordon Branston that responded whilst Mr. Pillay was presenting. Okay, he was saying the country-specific boundaries are very helpful in focusing attention on South Africa. However, most high-level risks are mobile or moving in function and nature. Example, climate and weather hazards. How is the in-situ disaster management model linked to the ex-situ or out-of-country sources of risk, and does this currently represent a high-low risk in itself? Secondly, he was saying, what role does combined SADC nations, for example, Sub-Sahara, have in the anticipation process and close relationship oversight with cross-boundary communities? There's a Elvis Fosso-Can Q. He was responding, I think, whilst Professor Yusuf was talking. Or it could have been Professor Pietra Besta. It was in the first session, the morning session. He was saying more death related to COVID in South Africa than any other African country. Prof, it is also important to mention the inaccurate reporting of death related to COVID in other African countries.
I take that as a comment rather than a question, which I agree with, and I think I acknowledge that while South Africa has the highest death rate in Africa, there might be problem with reporting because it has a well-developed health systems and therefore able to do surveillance and testing more than many other African countries. But having taken account of that as well, we still see a higher death rates in South Africa.
Right.
But indeed, there is underreporting. But I mean, having taken account of that, still you still see the differential.
Would you speculate on the reasons for it?
I can only speculate. Sorry, yeah, I can only speculate. There are suggestions that in, for example, West Africa, there's a lot of epidemic more frequent than in South Africa that anybody has ever, but they never get obviously into newspapers. So there might be cross, what do you call it, immunity. Even people have suggested that Ebola sometimes produce antibody response that could have reduced the severity of COVID in those populations. So there are different reasons, but it might be that, you know, for example, there's malaria endemic areas. They might be using a lot of this anti-malaria that's been suggested as being good, producing preventive effect. So there are different reasons for it, but it's clear that the SS deaths situation there is not comparable to that in South Africa.
Right.
Or even Southern Africa, I must say.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all the speakers for their absolutely interesting talks. I've got a question to Prof. Wall. You mentioned in your presentation the risk of or damage to the infrastructure through other people, through theft and so on. Are there any kind of percentages available or statistics available of how much actually they have an impact on the infrastructure?
Chair, do you want me to respond to that now?
Yes, please, Prof.
Yeah, sure. The statistics, look, if you are like the mines, for example, you are hit by a whole series of things. You can't get your goods out, you can't get your iron ore out and the rest of it through to Transnet or whatever. And then you say, okay, fine, because we couldn't get the stuff out, it's costing us so much, and that's fair enough. But now, what part of that is because Transnet, they haven't got spares for the locomotives, which is, I think, they're about 300 locomotives short. They're because of the kind of normal wear and tear damage to the infrastructure, because of vandalism and theft. It's very difficult to try and separate all of those things out. And the other problem is that this issue of theft and vandalism is increasing so fast. You saw that from the rail safety regulator, the extent to which the security-related incidents is increasing. And then couple that, for example, with the construction mafia, and couple that with the general violence. I mean, how long has the railway lines have possibly been out of order? And what's sitting behind that, and who's gaining from that? You know, it's a field which has emerged recently. There are lots and lots of theories about it, but nobody seems to quite know, and I can understand why not, what are the real reasons actually are behind much of this, apart from the poverty in the country, of course. And we were given some examples down in Nelson Mandela Bay of the extent to which things like pump stations, which tend to be in isolated areas, are now having to be built like safes, because the old wooden door with a padlock is no longer good enough. And you can imagine why, sitting in the middle of a poor community, the guy's got nothing else to do but to sit with a sledgehammer for 3 days and bash his way through a concrete wall. And then when he gets in there, he's going to steal some stuff and get a pittance for it, but it's going to cost thousands to replace, and it's going to cost enormous service delivery problems. So the short answer is how much nobody really knows. Lots of guesses have been made available. Some companies which have been directly affected have costed that, put it in the annual reports, like Astral Foods, for example. But the big problem is it's increasing so fast. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I don't have a really answer for you, I'm afraid. We just know it's causing a heck of a lot of damage, an increasing amount of damage.
Okay.
Could
Yes,
I respond as well? There's Mr. Branston has written in the chat here. He says, he talks about, could infrastructure be built or maintained that is future-proofed? Well, first of all, I don't know what future-proofed is. Secondly, my little understanding I do have a future-proofed is that you have to envisage the future first. and then try and proof it against that future. Now, who would have thought 10 years ago that you would have to build your pump stations like safes? Who would have thought that? Who would have thought that 10 years ago, well, when was it? 2019, PRASA cancelled the security contracts with security companies because of supply chain issues. And don't stop me on supply chain. One of my favorite rants, I could talk all day about that. But supply chain issues caused them to cancel. So they just happily left everything unguarded. Can you believe that? That's what the board decided to do. And the infrastructure was good for a future which was envisaged, which had security. It was not good for a future where there was no security. It simply wasn't good enough for that purpose. Who would have thought of a future like that? Who would have predicted that? I've been on the board of the Ekuleni Water Care Company, which is owned by Ekuleni, got 19 treatment works. It's like the biggest in the country. And we've just written a paper, a colleague and I, to talk about the effect of the lockdown on the treatment works. And who would have thought that something would come along, COVID-19, and cause such huge effect on wastewater treatment, the use of and the patterns and distribution between the treatment works, because factories just closed down completely, changed the whole. We could never have future-proofed our works for that purpose. Quite apart from the fact we're cash-strapped anyway. So we could future-proof, but A, you need to know what that future is. And I'm sure that in single person's lifetime, that's going to get overtaken by a new future. And secondly, you don't want to know how much money is involved. I mean, take those pump stations. To build a normal pump station costs X. To build that thing like a safe costs 5X. Thank you.
I think that is a very interesting point, that in fact we're behind for all kinds of reasons, for neglect and corruption and theft, but we're also behind because some of these things couldn't have been foreseen. I think the same applies to the infrastructure in KZN when the floods happened. You know, we weren't anticipating such a huge disaster, but of course climate change and such effects have been predicted for decades. And so from that point of view, I think we could have predicted it.
Well, especially, Chair, as the example of the Des Moines 1987 and various other storms showed us what nature is capable of.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So we should have been able to predict that. It was just that the infrastructure wasn't, like inverted commas, ready.
Right, yes. Thank you. More questions or comments from the chat? Nothing further. Okay, let me just give the speakers a chance to make closing comments. Professor Bester, could you make some closing comments? Can you have a microphone, please?
Thank you. Just to respond to Professor Wall, that I couldn't present my full presentation, but water and sanitation is definitely part of it. So, Professor Wall, you can go and have a look. I think my final conclusion is that health is more complex than what we think it is. We must learn from the COVID pandemic, but we must also remember that on the African continent, we will always fight against communicable diseases. Our newest enemy that's here is our lifestyle. And the lifestyle that we follow is actually the major epidemic that is consuming our funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Bester. Prof. Ayo Yusuf?
Thank you. I think my first reflection, listening to all the presentation, is the clear connection between public health emergencies and infrastructure, and obviously including surveillance system. Water indeed is very important in terms of, I just showed the issue around flood, infrastructure, climate change, driving all of this. We need to think higher level, upstream, and systems level interventions when we're thinking about appropriate preparedness. And the collective responsibility is very important. And I agree, we mustn't forget the disaster from non-communicable diseases as well, likely to be driven by lifestyle and the commercial interest, not public health interest from corporates. And I think they also get away with it because governments cannot be trusted. And this is why it's important that citizen participation and engagement through localizing global health security, it starts from local before we can all be secure around the world. An outbreak can happen in one small little town and it will get to United States tomorrow. So we are not all safe until everybody is safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Declan Pillay, do you have some closing comments? Is he online now? Still not? Okay. Professor Kevin Wall.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Nias, and thank you for twisting my arm to come and present today. I've enjoyed myself. Nothing else. Yeah, beginning again, you said please come with solutions. And step one in this little conundrum which I presented is that there needs to be agreement. The stakeholders need to agree on what the problem is. And this is where we are stuck at the moment, because the very stakeholders, we take government, even the government in itself, they don't agree on what the problem is and what the obstacles are. And only then can we really get around to the other possible light at the end of the tunnel, is that we look at examples of where things are actually working and take them as our role models. And let's not say we've got to go overseas to see what's happening correctly. There's a number of examples in this country where, for a whole lot of reasons, and many times there's different reasons in different places, where things are actually working. Just look to see where the Green Drop Awards are. Look to see who's got clean audits. Look to see where the Blue Drop Awards, which is going to come out next year, where they are, and all that kind of stuff. And look to see who the Auditor General praises. And you see a pattern. There is a pattern there. And so that's only talking about municipalities, of course. But there's various other examples where citizen leadership, Professor, you sort of just mentioned now, citizen leadership is making big difference. And the strange thing is that government seems to resent this in some cases and fights it, takes it to the courts, which I don't think, it's just bizarre, but that's what they do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yesterday, I attended the workshop to formulate a declaration for this conference in terms of science for social justice. And it's interesting, the kind of themes that came up there that are echoed in our discussion forum. One of the things is about data and the need for data and the potential of data to monitor and to address disasters. So I think we probably have inequality between good data and insufficient data in South Africa as everything. We have excellent and we have insufficient of everything. And I think, it's demonstrated today that we have very good data in certain cases. In fact, all the speakers have very good data that they can refer to and quote and analyze. But on the other hand, there are gaps, there are holes in that data, and it seems like it's because the system doesn't fully function. So data at local level, for example. And yes, so we see the unequal society reflected. With infrastructure as well, have the potential to build phenomenal infrastructure. We have good architects and builders, but it is not a general skill. So my last thought as we leave this discussion forum is about skills, the kind of skills that we need on the ground in order to address these insufficiencies in our system. It does look like government officials need training in how to deal with these, need training in the capture of data and the importance of that, need training in recognizing the importance of the infrastructure. Now, I know that there's a huge problem with theft and corruption, but maybe people just don't see it as important. Maybe they don't realize the implications of it. They also need dire warnings, of course, but they, maybe it could go some way if government officials at various levels could just have information and the urging of these important issues. My opinion. Anyway, as I said, presentations will be on the website as well as the slideshows if the speakers agree. There will be proceedings, complete proceedings of our discussions today. There will also be a media release that will come out, and the media release summarizes the issues that are being discussed and the themes that come out. So it's not to put a contentious view out there. It is respectful of your presentations and the discussion. With that, thank you very much for attending. Thank you to the speakers once again. We'll be sending you a small token of our appreciation, and to please come again. Attend tomorrow when we'll be at the same time from 9 to 12. And for those who are online, thank you for your attendance, and please listen in again tomorrow.